Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Wheel and Anchor webinar on the iconic Trans-Siberian Railway. This is yet another one of our programs that we have rescheduled, first of all, from last September to this September, and now from this September to next September. However, I am certain we will be able to go by September of next year. So let me first start off with our usual preamble. So if you are familiar to us already, if you've been on one of our webinars, you can just tune out for a minute. I just want to let you know what we are about at Wheel and Anchor, which is about bringing travelers together. And I see a few names of members who have traveled with us before, and they will well know about what it's like to be on a Wheel and Anchor type of a trip. You know, if we don't already know each other, and usually there's at least a handful of members who've met before coming on our trips, but we quickly become friends because we have a like-minded view of travel, and that's what was my impetus for setting up Wheel and Anchor in the first place. Is because what I discovered is that when you travel with people that think the same way about it, you just have a lot more fun. And in that vein, my offer, my commitment to our members is that you will come back being well-traveled and well-connected. Well-traveled in the sense that, you know, you can go on a trip and tick off the box and then come back and go, okay, what was it that I saw on Tuesday and Thursday? And or you can really have some lasting memories from a place, which is why we try to have trips that are a little bit slowed down. And of course, along the way, we meet some wonderful people, your fellow members that are, for the most part, from across Canada, but also all the wonderful people that we meet along the way. And that, for me, is the hallmark of a good trip and what we are about here at Wheel and Anchor. So joining me today, of course, I'm Gordon, founder of Wheel and Anchor. And in the background, we have my colleagues, Joel Curry and Paula Sarnik, together with whom we form the core team at Wheel and Anchor. And we are delighted to bring the program to you today. Our agenda for this morning is all about those interested in this program called the Trans-Siberian Railway, about this longest rail journey in the world. I will be your guide and host for this program as we take a look at what is in store for us in September of 2022. So let's dive right in with a few words about this truly magnificent rail journey. You know, the Trans-Siberian has, quite a long and interesting history. It was started at the end of the 19th century by one of the last Tsars, Tsar Alexander. And really, the motive behind it was very similar to Canada. I mean, there's many things about the building of this railway which we can compare to the building of our own Canadian National Railway across the country, because without it, Russia could not have become, one great and strong nation. And it took 25 years to build. I mean, you can well imagine, almost 9,000 kilometers of track, and they were laying it down at the rate of 600 kilometers a year. So if you think about that's like the distance from Toronto to Montreal is the amount of railway that was built in a year. Would that be possible today? I don't think so. So a miraculous feat. And it really sort of sparked a change in dynamics in the eastern part of Asia, because of course, as you can well imagine, the Japanese, when they started realizing that the Russians were building a railway out to the east, they were quite threatened, and it culminated in a war at the beginning part of the 20th century, the Russian-Japanese War, and the whole thing sort of set the tone for the geopolitical dynamics in East Asia from that point forward. So, and as we'll see along the way, I think a lot of these towns and cities really wouldn't exist, much like in Canada, had it not been for the building of the railway. There was no other way to get to these parts of Siberia that are just so far from everything. So let's look at a map. First of all, I want to show you a map of the whole region. This is the Eurasian continent, and you can see the line of the Trans-Siberian route. And the true original Trans-Siberian route goes from Moscow actually to Vladivostok, which is at the very far bottom right of the screen. And that is the original Trans-Siberian route, 9,288 kilometers long. So by far the longest single train sort of journey or stretch of rail, if you will. Of course, rail networks extend far beyond just these boundaries, but in terms of one train line, it's the longest one in the world. If we compare that, for example, to our railway across Canada from Toronto to Vancouver, the so-called fabled Canadian route, it's about 4,500 kilometers, so about half of the distance of the Trans-Siberian. And this incredible journey spans 8 time zones. Our journey is a little bit different, and as we see on the next slide here, when we look at our the map of our program, it starts off in Moscow, and actually we take a route that goes a little bit south, although it doesn't look like on the map because it's not exactly oriented like the globe, but we go south a little bit to Kazan in Tatarstan, and then back up to the main route, crossing the Urals, through the steppes of central Siberia into these beautiful forest and mountain regions down to Lake Baikal. And then we turn off the main Trans-Siberian route at a town called Ulan-Ude, which is just north of the Mongolian border. And from there we go across Mongolia on what's called actually the Trans-Mongolian Railway to the border to China, at which point we disembark and then do the last little leg to Datong and then on to Beijing by coach. So that is our program in a nutshell. And so I will give you the overview of what we can expect to see and what are the highlights of this amazing program on a day-by-day basis. So as I said, we begin our trip in Moscow, capital of Russia. Doesn't need much introduction. And Moscow, we don't have any direct flights from anywhere in Canada. So typically we're going to fly in through one of the gateways in Europe, Frankfurt being the most obvious one or the most common one. And we'll arrive in this incredibly huge and incredibly dense city of, well, dense in terms of population. There's 12 million people that live in Moscow. And what I can say about it is it's even for the intrepid traveler, it is quite a daunting place to be because, as I say, there's 12 million people that live there. And of course, the Russian alphabet is Cyrillic, so you can't understand it. And relatively few people speak English. So it's not exactly the kind of city that you want to just sort of wandering around getting lost in, which is not to say that the Russian people are actually quite helpful and quite friendly and quite helpful, but they don't necessarily speak English, which makes it a daunting place. Not to mention for all of the other reasons in our own sort of views on Russian culture and so on. But generally speaking, a very interesting place to visit. Just another little factoid: the subway system is the largest in the world, used by 9 million people, which is bigger than that of New York and London combined. So if you think about that, it's quite amazing. I mean, Moscow is a one of the biggest metropolises in the world. It's also quite the dichotomy between rich and poor. We talk about the wealth gap in parts of the world, and it's certainly very much alive and well in Russia with the oligarchs. And yet the vast majority of the population really do live at a quite a low standard of living. Anyway, enough about that. We'll arrive in Moscow. We'll have some time to sort of relax and put our feet up, get into our program. And on our first full day, we're going to spend it focusing on the highlights, because Moscow has some truly incredible buildings, and many of them, of course, are situated around so-called Red Square. They call it in Russian Krasnaya Ploshchad. And even though all the buildings like St. Basil's Cathedral that you see so beautifully here in this amazing picture, even though they're all in red, the Red Square has nothing to do with the color of the buildings. It actually is because its Russian name, Krasnaya, is an old Russian word which also means red. So that's why it's called the Red Square, although a lot of people think that it has also a political connotation, red being associated with communism. But as I say, we'll spend a lot of time in and around this square, because this, of course, is where you find the Kremlin, this incredible St. Basil's Cathedral, as well as the famous GUM department store, which was back in the day of the Iron Curtain, was where the Russian high-level officials got to go and buy all of their Western goods. It was off limits to the rest of the people in Russia. So really, really quite fascinating. And another highlight for sure, talking about the subway system, is we'll go and visit a few of their stations, which, as many of you will already know, are elaborately decorated, just like in a museum. And in particular, this one called Arbatskaya is one of the most beautiful subway stations, or beautiful pieces of art, that you can find in Moscow. So we'll have no doubt an amazing day exploring this wonderful city. We'll have another day in Moscow where we'll actually have an opportunity, before we head to the station to get on our train, to visit the Kremlin, to actually do a tour inside the Kremlin, which will be quite fascinating. But yeah, on our third day of the trip, so our second full day, I should say, we will head to Yaroslav railway station, the beginning point of the Trans-Siberian Railway. And it's at that point where we will see for the first time our beautiful red, yet again, train that is going to take us from one side of the continent to the other. So let me give you a few words about the train, because really this trip is obviously all about the train and the experience that we're going to have on board. This is not the regular Trans-Siberian train. Obviously, when they built the railway, and even still today, they have trains that run across the country. But I mean, they are in, compared to this, quite bland, very, very modest carriages that, aren't really all that comfortable. And they don't actually have a train that runs the entire length of the country anymore. It kind of goes in segments. So you can't do a trip like this on one train from beginning to end. The only way to do it is on a train like this one, the Tsar's Gold, which is operated by our partners in Germany. They've been doing this trip for like 18 years now. And they worked with the Russian railway authorities to pull together all of these beautifully restored railway carriages to make this special train that we have, that is here for sightseeing and makes all of these stops along the way. On board the train, it consists of predominantly sleeping carriages and dining carriages. Roughly every 3 carriages is a dining car. And the dining car, as we saw in the previous picture, is where sort of all of the gatherings, all the group gatherings and so on happen. This is where we have all of our meals, 3 meals a day. This is where we have our lectures, our talks, our briefings about the various stops that we make. And this is also where, in the evening time after dinner, it sort of turns into a fun lounge car. You sit around, order drinks, play cards, meet your other travelers. It's kind of where it all goes down. And of course, the other part of the train are the sleeping carriages, the compartments. As you can see here, an example of one of the more lavish ones. There are in total 6 categories of compartments aboard Tsar's Gold. We actually only offer 5. They have one that has 4 berths in it, so 4 people packed into one of these little compartments. But I didn't find that really as suitable for our audience in Canada. So we begin with the classic compartment, which you saw there, and the superior suite, which you see here, that are of similar size. In fact, they're identical in size. The only difference in these compartments is that the superior ones are vintage cars that retain this sort of very, very old style charm. The carriages themselves have 8 compartments per carriage, and there is a washroom at the end of each car with a toilet, and usually a shower facility, although it could be on the next carriage. It all depends on how they configure the train for each trip. And so the next category up that you'd have would be what they call a nostalgic comfort suite, as you can see pictured here, beautifully decorated. And here in this particular category, you have an upper and a lower berth. So it's more comfortable than the classic and the superior categories because it's slightly larger. But the beds are in upper and lower. And in this particular case, you have one shared washroom between two compartments. So two compartments share one washroom in between. So a little bit more privacy. But I must say about the washrooms, because this is the most common question about this train. It's like, do I want to share a washroom? Well, they look after these really, really well. There is at least one or two attendants on every carriage that are there to make sure that you're looked after, that you have everything you need, and that first and foremost that the washrooms are kept very clean and tended to after every single use. So the report that we've had from other travelers' experiences on the train is that it's actually no big deal. It's actually quite comfortable to sort of to have this kind of an arrangement. So you can be as comfortable in a regular cabin as you can is in one of the upgraded cabins. We also have our deluxe or suite category, which is the Bolshoi and Bolshoi Platinum Suite. You can see pictured here. And these ones have a slightly larger berth on the bottom, a larger bed. It's not quite the size of a double bed. And then you have an upper berth as well. And then these have, of course, a private washroom. There's 5 of them per carriage. If you really want to go at all the stops, but again, they're not large. The largest compartment in a Bolshoi Platinum Suite is 77 square feet. So, but let's face it, we're on a train. This is how it goes, it certainly doesn't diminish from the wonderful experience. If anything, it's part of it. So as I said, there's lots going on in the train. You'll spend your time either in your compartment or a lot of time, of course, in the dining cars where they have, interesting talks about Russian culture and the language, and a vodka tasting at one point during the trip. And so there's always something going on. And of course, we have a lot of time off train as well, because we make stops pretty much every single day, except when we're in the midst of Siberia. So anyway, without further ado, after we have left Moscow, our first night on the train, we'll arrive in the morning in Kazan, which, as I mentioned on the map, our first stop, which is in the middle of Tatarstan. And it's considered the third most city in Russia. And Tatarstan, like the other Stan countries, which are further to the south, has its own sort of distinct culture, its own ethnicity. In fact, most of the people in Tatarstan are Sunni Muslims. So you go from something very ethnic Russian in Moscow to a place that on our very first stop is very, very different. And you can get a sense of it by the architecture here. They even write using Latin script. So everywhere else in Russia is Cyrillics. But all of a sudden here, as we go around and visit this interesting city, you'll be able to read. I mean, read in the sense of you'll be able to understand the letters. So we'll spend a whole day here enjoying beautiful Kazan before we return to our train, and we'll then head up over the Ural Mountains. The Ural Mountains are sort of formerly known as the geographical feature that separates Europe from Asia. And in the morning, we wake up in Asia on the other side at Yekaterinburg. And Yekaterinburg is, as noted in the caption here, capital of the Ural region. And so sort of backdropped by this mountain range of the Urals. And it's famous because this is where the end of the Tsar's reign over Russia, where it came to an end. The Bolsheviks executed for Nicholas at the end of the Russian Revolution, and that was what was the transformation then into the Soviet Union. And some, remarkable history here. The city is a juxtaposition between, modern buildings and some of these spectacular old ones, like the Church on Spilled Blood, which is the one with the gold domes, as you can see here. Economically speaking, the city is all about the metal industry. There's a huge mining industry outside of town. And this is where actually, a fun fact that all of the copper that's found in the Statue of Liberty was mined here in Yekaterinburg. So no doubt an interesting stop. So once again, we'll retire to our train overnight and rattle our way along. And in the morning, we will emerge into Siberia and specifically into Novosibirsk, which is known as the heart or is technically the capital of Siberia. And what's interesting about it is, it says the center of Russia, and yet if you look on the map, it's actually nowhere near the center of Russia, even though it's the heart of Siberia. Still 2/3 of the whole continent, of the whole country, stretches further to the east from Novosibirsk. But this city, which is the third largest in the Soviet Union, that a lot of people have never heard of, it was founded because of the Trans-Siberian Railway. So until the railway came along, which is, really just over 100 years ago, it all but didn't exist. And when you get there, you will really notice that it is, the most Soviet of all cities, because it really only has existed since the beginning of the Soviet Union, as compared to so many of these other cities that have a long history, like even Irkutsk, where we will get on the following days. So Novosibirsk will be a very, very interesting stop. The city has almost 2 million people in it, so it's a big city. It's the biggest city that you've never heard of, so to speak. Maybe not. There's many of them in China in the meantime that are quite large, but really a fascinating testament to what the development of Siberia involved, because of the building of the Trans-Siberian. So we will now head deeper into the parts of Siberia that are very, very remote. We'll lose our cell phone signal, and as we head further and further east into this super rugged wilderness. And of course, Siberia as a landmass itself is already almost the size of Canada, comprises 2/3 of the whole country of Russia. And so here it's about gazing out the window, watching for, brown bears, and we'll do what Russians cherish so much. We'll taste some of that delicious Russian vodka. This will be, I think, the only day that we don't actually disembark the train, because it's quite a long journey between here and our next stop, which will be Irkutsk. Irkutsk again is one of those places that we've probably never heard of before. I always remember it from the game of Risk, the board game that we used to play as a kid. It had Irkutsk on it. I always, wondered what exactly that meant and what's it all about. Once again, when the railway came into this part of Siberia, they saw all these sort of ancient wooden buildings, and they dubbed it the Paris, the Siberian Paris, because when you look at all these charming buildings in the center of the old town, and it's not a huge city, but it really is sort of reminiscent as if it was a wooden Paris. The language here, again, another ethnicity spoken by the Tofelars, a language called Tofa. You've never heard of it before. And this is one of the things that I really enjoy about this trip, is because we learn about such a vast part of the world that we have hardly any relationship to. Because if you think about it, what our knowledge of Russia is informed by current affairs, by the media, and yet there's so much to this incredible country, and we see it when we come to places like Irkutsk, literally on the other side of the world. And even though we've already traveled all these days on the train so far, we're really only halfway through the whole continent. So that just gives you a sense of how big it really is. And in Irkutsk, we'll actually disembark the train. So of course, most of the trip we're staying on the train, but here in Irkutsk, and then one more time in Ulaanbaatar, we stay at a hotel, which will be really nice because you can, stretch out a little bit and take a long hot shower in a proper shower. So it's I think everybody relishes, I think, this day by the time we get here after 5 nights on the train. From Irkutsk, we continue further and we start to head southeast from here down towards Lake Baikal, which will certainly be yet another highlight on the trip from a natural landscape. Many people say that there is no more beautiful lake in the world than Lake Baikal. And actually from Irkutsk in the morning when we check out of the hotel, we're first going to go by coach to the northern shore of the lake. We're going to hop on a boat and then cross over the lake. So we'll get a chance to actually cruise on the lake for a while. And on the other side, our train will be waiting and we'll pick up the train. And the train line that we're taking is actually not the main Trans-Siberian anymore. Again, we'll have taken a separate set of tracks to enjoy the scenery of Lake Baikal. A few words about Lake Baikal. You may have heard of it before. The most voluminous lake in the world. There is more water than all of the Great Lakes combined. And Joel, if you just advance the slide there, it is the deepest lake in the world, with a maximum depth of 1,600 meters, so it's a mile deep at the deepest point. And it's super biodiverse because it's surrounded by all this incredible wilderness. I mean, they've got something like 2,000 species of plants and animals that live in and around. And Siberia, as it's known for, super harsh cold winters, so much so that the lake freezes solid every year and stays that way well into May. And while we're cruising along the lake, while we're traveling by train, of course, along the lake, we'll, if the weather is good, and the weather at this time of the year in September typically is in sort of the mid-teens during the day, but if the weather's good, we'll stop. The train will stop. We'll do a train picnic. We'll get off the train and we'll have a lovely dinner beside Lake Baikal, which will be certainly one of the more memorable moments of the trip. So as we leave Lake Baikal, well, again, then we're going to continue heading southeast from here, and we'll end up in a little town of Ulan-Ude, and this is where the Trans-Siberian part of the line, where we diverge off of it, and then start to head to the south. So we'll have not a long stop in Ulan-Ude. It's a very picturesque location in this Selenga Valley, and we'll stop to see the largest statue of Lenin, or the largest bust of Lenin, of course, the Russian leader in the world. And you'll be surprised out here in the middle of nowhere what a modern and interesting city it actually is. And it's important because, as I say, it sits on the crossroads between the Trans-Siberian and the Trans-Mongolian. So obviously the two lines connect here, and goods, the Trans-Siberian still carries like 30% of Russia's exports from Siberia. So it's incredibly, incredibly important to the infrastructure of the country. From Ulan-Ude, as I say, we head south then on the Trans-Mongolian line overnight, once again, pulling in the next day to Ulaanbaatar. If you get up early enough, you'll see the wonderful wonderful rolling hills that surround Ulaanbaatar, which of course is up in the great Mongolian plains. And we'll spend the day here. In fact, we'll overnight here, as I mentioned before. The nice thing is we'll actually have a little bit more free time to enjoy the city. We'll do a cultural show as well. And then, as I say, we'll stay overnight in a hotel, but this is where we actually have a fun option as well for those that wish. For a modest surcharge, we can stay in an authentic Mongolian yurt. And I am informed that they're actually really, really nice. They're very comfortable, all of the animal skins on the floor, and kind of a neat experience to try if you're game for roughing it a bit for a night. But otherwise it'll be exciting. I think people really, places you otherwise wouldn't get to on your travels unless you're a super adventurer. So in the morning, once again, we'll do a little side trip by coach, and we'll head into Terelj National Park, which people say it looks like the Alps, these green valleys and mountain peaks. But of course, we're in the middle of Mongolia, and here we'll get a chance to visit a nomadic tribe, the herdsmen that still live in this area, and they will do a horse riding demonstration and really give us a bit of an insight into how some of these people actually still live today. So it'll be a fun day and a good way to understand a bit about Mongolia. Once again, we get back on our train, and it'll be our last night actually on the train as we begin to get into the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert being this vast desert, the fifth largest, or the sixth largest desert in the world. It's not all made up of sand dunes like you would imagine a desert to be, like the Sahara Desert. It's sort of a combination between very dry steppe and it's a cold desert, as you can imagine. I mean, it sits sort of at 1,000 meters above sea level and up. So it often snows here. So a little bit different than a typical desert that comes to mind. Here, this desert covers a great part of Mongolia and into northern China. And you really get a sense of the expanse, these wide expanses in this part of the world. We will arrive later in the afternoon on this day at the border between Mongolia and China. At this point, we will disembark and we'll say goodbye to our friends that we will have met on the Trans-Siberian Railway. In fact, everybody disembarks because the railway gauge in Russia is different than that of China. So the train itself cannot continue into China. So the rest of the group will wait for several hours in Erlian. But this is where I decided to make a different program than what most do because well, first of all, I'm impatient and I don't like to wait around for hours and hours. We'll hop a coach. We'll cross the border, of course, into China. We'll get on a coach and head for Datong. So it's a few hours by coach where we'll arrive in the early evening and check into our hotel for the next couple of nights. And I wanted to visit Datong because it has two very, very interesting UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The first being the Yungan Grottos with these incredible sculptures inside the caves. And the second being, as you see here, the hanging temples at Mount Hengshan. And, most people don't get this far outside of Beijing to see these incredible sites. And I think it's a very important part of Chinese culture because it's where all three religions in China, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, actually meld together here at this temple. So it's a very worthwhile stop because, as many of you will know, I like to do the things that are interesting and a bit off the beaten track. So after another night in Datong, we'll then continue the final leg of our journey into Beijing. And on the way, we will stop at the Great Wall of China. And I know some of our members have been to China before. And, you think, oh, the Great Wall, it's part of every trip to Beijing. But this is one of those places, and I've stood on the Great Wall a few times myself, that literally sends chills down your spine. Because, of course, the Great Wall of China is one of the seven wonders of the world for good reason. It has been called the longest cemetery on Earth because over the 1,000 years that it took to build, 1 million people lost their lives in this effort by the Hans to isolate themselves from the Mongols. And of course, the official length is, it's almost as long as the Trans-Siberian Railway at almost 9,000 kilometers long. But of course, they built it in various bits and pieces all through China. So there's some 20,000 kilometers of wall. And standing on this wall, even if you've been there before, I know for me, it always sends chills down my spine thinking about the mammoth human effort that was required to build this. So I think a visit to the Great Wall, I think every time I've been to Beijing, I've made the trek out there. It's certainly worth seeing. Our last 3 nights in Beijing itself, which hardly needs any introduction, and we will see the classic sites, of course, on our first full day, the Forbidden City being the most significant of which And being the largest imperial palace in the world, it is a sight to behold. And when you arrive typically on the boulevard that separates Tiananmen Square from the Forbidden City, and you look over at Tiananmen Square, and you see the huge tribute to Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, and then you realize when you think about the Forbidden City that is literally more than double the size of Tiananmen Square. It never ceases to leave you in awe, right? 1,000 buildings, kilometers of moat that surround this thing. Its size is probably what makes it the most fascinating, but it's also an incredible tribute to Chinese architecture. And you can visit Beijing over and over again and never see even a fraction of the almost 8 million square feet of buildings that comprise this mammoth complex. So we'll spend a good chunk of the day there. That goes without saying. But we'll also have a chance to wander around Beijing's grand boulevards, and it's quite an impressive city. I've and I know there's a lot of sort of controversy about it, particularly with the political relations with China these days, but it doesn't take away from the amazing history. Our last full day in Beijing, we'll make a trek again a little bit outside the city, and we'll see something that most travelers overlook when they head to Beijing. We'll go to the Summer Palace of the Emperor, which is truly majestic, not only because it sits on the side of this amazing lake, but it is UNESCO called it a masterpiece of landscape architecture, the way that they have epitomized Chinese gardens, but on a grand scale. So it's one of those places that if you're thinking about planning a Chinese garden, and they really are quite cool, this could be your inspiration. So spend a good half of a day there, and then again some free time to enjoy Beijing, and a lovely farewell dinner of Peking duck, one of my favorite dishes anywhere. And that will wrap up our tour across Asia. We'll have traveled like a quarter of the way around the world overland. So it'll be quite an amazing adventure. I'll give you a few details on the program. Of course, all of it is in our brochure, as always, listing the pricing and all the detailed inclusions and so on. You can see some of them here. There are a couple of categories, as I said, not mentioned, but these are the key ones. I should mention at this point in time, we everybody that was signed up to go on our trip for 2021 is joining us again for next year. So we actually only have a few compartments remaining for our 2022 trip. We will likely be going again in 2023, but that's yet to be determined. There's still a lot of unknowns, but with the group that's coming next year in 2022, we'd love to have you along. And of course, if you're interested, you should consider giving us a call sooner than later. I won't go through all the inclusions. Of course, most important to know, of course, everything on the train is included except your beverages. It's really a wonderful program. It's quite inclusive. So there's not too much extra that you have to reach into your pocket for that night in the yurt if you would like. But pretty much as per most of our programs, you're quite well looked after throughout. The only thing that's excluding that I'll mention here, other than flights, as usual, are the visas. And in the early days when we first offered this, times were a little bit easier, and there were a few less political tensions, so we were able to do visas ourselves. But that's now next to impossible for us. So we have a very professional agency that will look after you and make sure that that you get your visas for the program. But it's a good point to mention that it does take time, just because of all of the bureaucracy that they've put into place. So it's an important thing. If you have questions about that, please do ask Paula, and she can give you a little bit more insight on that. As far as airfares are concerned, as I've said all along, we'll see how it goes. But traditionally, for those that had been booked on the program before, it was sort of between 1,000 and 1,400, depending on when you got lucky to book your ticket. That's for one way from Canada. So from Toronto, our typical major cities, to Moscow via Frankfurt, and then returning nonstop from Beijing either to Vancouver or Toronto. But I should note as well that those flights aren't all operating again yet. I'm optimistic that they'll be reinstated by later this year. So, so we'll see how it goes. So now is the time to answer any questions that you might have about this program. And of course, as always, our contact information is there. I'm sure you have it by now, but do drop us an email or give us a call if you have a question, and I'll try to take a look now at the ones that have come through. Yeah, I see one comment here from Fran that said she loved the Great Wall, but people should know how crowded it is, and that is the truth. There are two main locations where one can officially visit the wall, and it's busy. There's no two ways about it. I think it seems like everybody in China is there on any given day, but it's still worth seeing. It's still worth experiencing. Troy asked a question: if the train is bumpy at night, and I'd be lying if I said it was smooth. This is not like riding the bullet train in Japan or something like that. It is a little bit bumpy. The rail beds date back to the beginning of the 20th century, so they're in some cases still even 100 years old. But it's something you do get used to. For anyone that suffers from motion sickness, as I always say, it's always good to have that little bit of gravel or a patch with you. But you do get used to it, and otherwise there's sort of stronger things that you can take to aid you in your sleep if you're bothered by the motion of the train. I find it kind of rocks you to sleep. The first night you're not quite used to it, but by the second night you usually get a pretty good rest. Alex asked us what the food is like on board. Yes, I forgot to mention the food. Thank you for raising that, Alex. Generally, it's like continental European style cuisine, so we'll definitely try out some Russian specialties along the way. But I mean, with all due respect to the Russians, it's not known for cuisine that is most satisfying to us. So it's very good, very, very, very good European cuisine. I wouldn't call it gourmet, but the reports back have been that the food is truly excellent. And you can get some wines and so on on board as well, mostly from Europe. Marilyn asked about currencies that you need to bring. Yeah, you need to settle the bills on the train in either euros, US dollars, or Russian rubles. And in Russia, of course, they use the ruble. So, I mean, you could probably pass off some US dollars here or there, but for the most part, it's not really recognized. So you need to bring rubles. And of course, in China, the currency is the Chinese yuan. So, but easily, you can easily get it at ATMs around the country. Good. I think that addresses all the questions that I see in the question box. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you have questions, please do let me know. It's a fascinating program. You will definitely not regret this one. It will be something that will go into the memory book of trips. And as I say, we've got a few cabins left, so please do let us know. Next week, we're going to be talking about Peru. So this is a terrific trip that we've put together to see Machu Picchu and all the other wonders of Peru. So tune in for that next week on June the 3rd with our guest, Martine, who is an authority on Peru and will be hosting that trip. Look forward to seeing you on that. And as always, take care. Go and get that second shot if you haven't already. I think everybody got the first one. So we'll get through this soon. Take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon.